You get the atmosphere. I mean, I did find it harrowing. I mean,
Did you find it harrowing?
I did.
What follows is a dramatized royal scenario, but its central question feels strikingly real. What happens when a planned royal evening begins to carry a message no one was meant to notice? At Buckingham Palace, a gala celebrating service and continuity was taking shape. Yet one late change had begun to trouble those watching. For weeks, the event had been presented as a tribute to national service, charitable duty, and the future of the British royal family. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been closely associated with one of the evening's central presentations, a film featuring hospital workers, military families, early years educators, and young volunteers. It was not designed as a personal celebration of Catherine. It connected the monarchy's image with ordinary people whose work rarely received the attention it deserved. But only hours before the guests were expected to enter the grand ballroom, the program was altered. At first, the adjustment appeared minor. Catherine's introduction was shortened. Her recorded contribution was moved deeper into the evening, while a new sequence centered on Queen Camilla was placed near the opening. Royal programs change frequently for practical reasons involving timing, security, protocol, or the king's schedule. Yet this revision carried unusual symbolic weight. The gala was supposed to look toward the future, and the future Princess of Wales had suddenly become almost invisible within it. Was this simply an effort to give Queen Camilla, as the serving consort, the prominence expected of her position? Or had someone decided that Catherine's growing presence was beginning to overshadow the message the current royal household wished to send? No public statement addressed the alteration. In this fictionalized account, few people outside the production team knew anything had changed. The orchestra continued rehearsing. Florists arranged pale roses beneath portraits of former monarchs, while technicians tested 3 enormous screens above the ballroom floor. To the arriving guests, everything would look settled. Inside the preparation rooms, however, another detail emerged. The original film had not merely been shortened. Several images connected to Catherine's work had been removed entirely, including a closing sequence showing the Princess of Wales speaking with families who had experienced illness and separation. The footage was restrained but meaningful. It suggested that royal service was not only about ceremony, it was also about being present when people felt most uncertain. That sequence had been replaced by a formal montage focused on continuity under King Charles III and Queen Camilla. There was nothing improper about honoring the king and queen at a Buckingham Palace gala. Yet those involved in the production noticed that the revision did more than strengthen Camilla's position. It changed the meaning of the film. The original version moved from present duty toward future responsibility. The replacement remained firmly centered on the existing court. One missing sequence could be dismissed as editing. A completely altered message was harder to ignore. Catherine learned of the change shortly before departing Kensington Palace. Those near her expected disappointment, perhaps even a request for the original presentation to be restored. Instead, she asked only 2 questions: who had authorized the final version, and whether the original file still existed. The calmness of that response mattered. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, immediately understood the deeper implication. This was not only about his wife being denied recognition. It touched a more sensitive issue, whether the future king and queen were being prepared for their eventual roles, or quietly reminded that the present household still controlled every public symbol of succession. William favored confronting the matter before the gala began. A direct challenge might have restored Catherine's contribution. It might also have produced a family dispute capable of overshadowing the evening. Catherine appeared to recognize the danger. If she protested too strongly, critics might call her ambitious. If she stayed silent, the revised presentation would stand as a carefully staged picture of royal influence. That was the trap. For years, Catherine's public strength had rested partly on restraint. She rarely needed to dominate a room to become the person observers remembered. A gesture, an empty chair, a missing piece of jewelry, or a brief exchange between senior royals could become more powerful than an official statement. And on this evening, the most revealing detail might not be what Catherine said. It might be what she allowed others to believe. Rather than withdrawing, she confirmed that she would attend. Rather than demanding visible changes, she asked that the technicians make no further alterations until she arrived. The request confused even those supporting her. Why preserve a presentation that seemed designed to reduce her role? Why walk into a ballroom where the opening images might reinforce her exclusion? Queen Camilla, meanwhile, was preparing to enter with every reason to feel secure. The program placed her beside the king at its emotional center. The principal guests would see a monarchy led by Charles and Camilla, stable in appearance and protected from questions about transition. But one problem remained. The original file had not disappeared. A junior production employee discovered that both versions were still stored inside the presentation system. The system also recorded when the replacement was uploaded and which internal account approved it. That discovery did not prove a personal plot, but it transformed an awkward program change into something far more consequential. Someone had expected the first version to be forgotten. Catherine now knew that it had survived. As official cars approached Buckingham Palace, the issue was no longer simply whether the Princess of Wales would receive recognition. It had become a question of who controlled the monarchy's public story, who feared the symbolism of the next generation, and why a charitable film had been altered with such urgency. Yet Catherine still made no accusation. She entered the palace quietly, greeted the waiting staff, and looked once toward the dark screens above the ballroom. Because what appeared on those screens later that evening would not merely expose an edit, it would reveal how much meaning had been hidden inside it. That hidden meaning became clearer the moment Catherine crossed into the staterooms and realized the altered presentation was only one part of a much larger arrangement. In this dramatized account, the gala had been divided into 3 carefully controlled movements. The first honored the work already completed under the king's reign. The second celebrated the charities associated with the senior household. The final segment was meant to look ahead, linking the monarchy's traditions with the generation expected to carry those traditions forward. Catherine had originally appeared throughout that final movement. Now she appeared for less than 20 seconds. The reduction mattered because royal events are rarely interpreted through words alone. Position, timing, entrances, photographs, and the order in which people are acknowledged can all shape the message the public receives. A royal figure placed near the beginning appears central. Someone moved toward the end may seem secondary, even when no formal announcement has been made. And this gala was not taking place before an ordinary audience. Among the guests were charitable leaders, diplomats, military representatives, broadcasters, and individuals whose future cooperation would matter to the royal household. They were not simply attending a celebration. They were watching how the monarchy wished to define itself at a moment when questions of continuity, health, and succession had become increasingly difficult to separate from public life. That was why the revised program had consequences beyond Catherine's personal disappointment. It suggested that the current court was determined to control not only the evening, but also the image of what came after it. William noticed another change as soon as he examined the printed order of events. His own contribution had been moved as well. The Prince of Wales was still expected to deliver a formal message, but it would now come after a long tribute to the King and Queen, leaving him little room to speak about the future without appearing to challenge the tone already established. The adjustment was subtle. It was also highly effective. If William followed the program, he would appear supportive but restrained. If he departed from it, the evening could be interpreted as evidence of tension between father and son. Either way, the balance favored those who had designed the revised sequence. Was that the purpose from the beginning, or had the production simply become entangled in the sensitivities surrounding 2 generations of royal leadership? No one in the room could yet answer that question. Catherine did not immediately show William the technical record connected to the 2 files. Instead, she asked one of her aides to confirm whether the approval account belonged to a named member of staff or to a shared office used by several departments. That distinction was crucial. A shared account could point to an administrative decision. A personal account could suggest direct responsibility. The reply arrived minutes later. The account belonged to the office responsible for coordinating Queen Camilla's public program. That did not prove that Camilla had personally ordered the changes. Senior royal offices contain numerous advisors, secretaries, and communication staff, any one of whom might adjust an event in the belief that they were protecting their principal. Buckingham Palace had not publicly confirmed any such episode, and within this fictional scenario, the distinction between personal instruction and institutional overreach remained deliberately unclear. But the discovery raised a more difficult possibility. What if the alteration had not begun with the Queen at all? What if members of her household had acted because they believed they already understood what she wanted? That would make the situation harder to resolve. A direct order could be confronted. A culture of anticipation, in which advisors competed to protect influence without being asked, could spread through the palace without leaving one obvious person responsible. For Catherine, that possibility carried a familiar emotional weight. Royal women are often judged not only by what they do, but by the behavior of those surrounding them. A misplaced briefing, an aggressive headline, or an unexplained scheduling decision can become attached to a name long before the public learns who actually authorized it. Camilla had experienced that pressure for years. Now Catherine appeared to be entering the same machinery from the opposite direction. The symmetry was impossible to ignore. One woman had spent decades trying to secure acceptance within the institution. The other had gradually become a symbol of its future. Their public roles did not need to be openly hostile for tension to exist between them. Influence itself could create friction, particularly when affection, legitimacy, and succession were all being measured by the same audience. Some royal watchers might see the revised presentation as a reasonable attempt to honor the serving queen. Others might interpret it as evidence that Catherine's popularity had become difficult for the present household to manage. But popularity was only one part of the problem. Catherine's image carried something more enduring, continuity without immediate controversy. For an institution repeatedly challenged by family division, public criticism, and questions about relevance, that quality had enormous strategic value. It also meant that every appearance involving the Princess of Wales could be read as a preview of the monarchy's next chapter. That was precisely what made the missing footage so sensitive. The original closing sequence did not show Catherine claiming power. It showed her listening. She sat beside families, allowed them to speak, and connected their experiences to the idea of public service. The imagery was gentle, but its message was unmistakable. The future of royal duty would be presented not through distance, but through emotional presence. Removing that sequence did more than reduce her screen time. It removed an alternative vision of monarchy. While the guests began moving toward the ballroom, Catherine finally showed William the approval record. His response was immediate. He wanted the event delayed until the origin of the instruction could be established. She resisted. A delay would alert whoever had made the alteration and allow the evidence to be dismissed as a technical misunderstanding. More importantly, it would turn the gala into a visible confrontation before the guests had even taken their seats. Catherine proposed something more controlled. The official program would continue exactly as revised. Camilla's office would receive no warning. No accusation would be made, and no member of staff would be confronted before the presentation began. William understood the risk. If nothing changed, Catherine would be publicly diminished before an audience capable of carrying that impression far beyond the palace walls. If she intervened too openly, the same audience might see calculated retaliation rather than quiet correction. The future queen was attempting to walk between those two dangers. Then, less than 15 minutes before the royal procession entered the ballroom, the junior technician returned with another discovery. The approval account had not only uploaded the replacement film, it had also scheduled a command to delete the original version immediately after the gala ended. That detail changed the atmosphere entirely. Someone had not merely wanted a different presentation shown. Someone had wanted the first one erased. Yet the deletion command contained a second authorization code, one linked to an office far closer to the center of royal power than anyone had expected. And once that code appeared on the screen, the question was no longer whether Catherine had been quietly sidelined. The question was how high the decision had traveled, and who inside Buckingham Palace already knew. The second authorization code did not belong to Camilla's communications team, nor did it come from the technicians responsible for preparing the ballroom. In this dramatized scenario, it was connected to the office that coordinated the king's official schedule, a department positioned close enough to the center of palace operations that its approval could make almost any alteration appear routine. That discovery did not mean King Charles III had personally ordered Catherine's contribution to be removed. Senior offices often act through layers of secretaries, advisors, and program coordinators, and the monarch may never see every production decision made in his name. Yet the appearance of the code created a serious contradiction. The altered film had been presented as a practical revision, but practical revisions did not usually require approval from two separate royal households and a command to erase the original material once the event was over. Someone had treated the first version as a problem that needed to disappear. Catherine asked the technician to examine the timing of both approvals. The first had been issued earlier that afternoon from Camilla's office. The second appeared less than 20 minutes later, suggesting that the request had traveled rapidly through the palace structure. Whether the king's staff had independently agreed with the change or merely authorized it without examining the footage remained unclear. But the speed mattered. It suggested that the decision was not being handled as a minor editorial disagreement. It was being protected by the institution itself. For William, this touched a tension that had existed beneath royal life for generations. A monarch must remain visibly central until the final day of the reign, while the heir must prepare to assume responsibility without appearing impatient for that moment to arrive. The relationship requires extraordinary discipline. The future king must demonstrate leadership, but never so forcefully that the present sovereign appears diminished. Catherine's role made that balance even more delicate. Her public appeal strengthened William's position, yet it also made the transition feel more immediate. Every successful appearance, every widely praised charitable initiative, and every image of the couple with their children could quietly remind the public that another royal chapter was already forming. There was nothing improper about that. Succession is the foundation of a hereditary monarchy. But emotionally, succession can be more difficult than protocol allows anyone to admit. Charles had waited most of his life to become king. Camilla had endured decades of criticism before being recognized beside him as queen. Their present status carried not only ceremonial importance, but the weight of a long, personal struggle. Some advisors might therefore have believed that a gala focused too heavily on William and Catherine would reduce the moment the king and queen had waited so long to inhabit. If that interpretation was correct, the alteration may not have been motivated by simple jealousy. It may have reflected an institutional instinct to protect the current reign from appearing temporary. Yet in attempting to strengthen the present, the household risked weakening the future. The monarchy depends on continuity, and continuity cannot be celebrated while the next generation is carefully concealed. This was the deeper contradiction now forming beneath the evening. The same institution that needed Catherine's popularity for long-term stability appeared unwilling to acknowledge how much influence she already carried. Was this an effort to preserve royal order, or evidence that the palace had not yet learned how to share symbolic power between two generations? The question became more sensitive when the production team examined the removed sequence frame by frame. Near its conclusion, Catherine had spoken briefly about duty continuing beyond any single person or period. The wording was not political, and it did not refer directly to succession. In the context of the original film, it simply connected service with responsibility passed from one generation to another. Placed inside the revised atmosphere of the gala, however, the line could be interpreted differently. It could sound like a message about transition. That may have been entirely accidental. It may also explain why certain advisors consider the sequence too sensitive to remain. The problem was that removing it created precisely the controversy they may have been trying to prevent. A quiet statement about continuity had now become a hidden piece of evidence in a struggle over who could speak for the monarchy's future. Catherine appeared to understand the danger more clearly than anyone around her. If she exposed the approval trail without context, Camilla could be blamed for a decision she may not have made alone. The king's office could then be accused of participating in a deliberate campaign against the Princess of Wales. The result would not merely embarrass one royal figure. It could place the current sovereign, the serving queen and the future king, and queen on opposing sides of the same public scandal. William's concern was more immediate. Allowing the presentation to proceed meant accepting that the audience would first see the altered version as intended. Any correction afterward would have to be carefully controlled, or it could appear that the Prince and Princess of Wales had used a charitable gala to challenge the king. The couple now faced a choice between two damaging outcomes: remain silent, and the revised film would establish an image of the monarchy in which their future role had been deliberately reduced. Intervene, and they could be accused of transforming royal service into a contest for attention. The future monarch reportedly favored addressing the matter with his father privately before entering the ballroom. Catherine's approach was more strategic. She believed the king should see the evidence, but not through an emotional confrontation in a corridor where advisors could immediately shape the explanation. He needed to encounter the contradiction for himself. That distinction revealed the growing difference between William's protective instinct and Catherine's understanding of public perception. William wanted the decision reversed. Catherine wanted its meaning made impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the guests had begun taking their seats. Camilla entered the staterooms with the composed authority expected of a queen, greeting diplomats and charity leaders beneath the gilded ceilings. Nothing in her public manner suggested concern. If she knew about the revised film, she appeared confident that the matter had already been settled. Charles arrived shortly afterward, carrying the visible formality of a monarch presiding over an important national evening. He seemed unaware that two versions of the program still existed inside the control system, or that one of them now threatened to expose a division extending across several royal offices. Then the presentation director received a final message. It instructed the team to bypass the archived files, lock the revised film into the system, and disable all manual changes once the royal speeches began. The order arrived from the same central office attached to the second approval code. For the first time, even William began to question whether the altered presentation had been authorized far closer to the king than anyone had assumed. But before Catherine could decide how to respond, the junior technician noticed something hidden inside the message history. An earlier instruction had been forwarded to the central office from a private device not registered to any member of staff. The sender's identity had been concealed. The device, however, had connected to the palace network from a room currently occupied by one of the evening's most senior royal figures. And once Catherine saw which room it was, the entire direction of the story changed. The room identified by the concealed device was not the king's private study or a technical office. It was the Queen's withdrawing room, a chamber prepared for Camilla before the procession began, and in this dramatized account that detail immediately changed the balance of the evening. It still did not prove that she had personally written the instruction. An aide could have used the room or handled the device. Yet the timing was exact. The message had been sent while Camilla was preparing nearby, minutes before the presentation system was locked. Catherine asked for the record to be copied onto an isolated drive. William's instinct was to go directly to his father, but before he could leave, a member of the king's household arrived with a warning. Charles had been told there was a minor disagreement over timing, and he had already authorized the program to continue. The explanation given to him was simple. Catherine's sequence had been reduced because the film was running too long. That explanation might have ended the matter if the records had supported it. They did not. The revised film was 47 seconds longer than the original. For the first time, William realized that someone had used the king's authority to protect a decision he may not have fully understood. And that raised a more dangerous question. Who believed they were powerful enough to speak through the monarch's name? The royal procession entered before anyone could answer. The guests rose as the king and queen moved beneath the chandeliers, followed by William and Catherine. Applause filled the ballroom, but the four senior royals understood the moment very differently. Charles believed a production disagreement had been resolved. Camilla appeared confident that the revised film was secure. William knew the king had been given a misleading explanation. Catherine knew the hidden instruction had come from the queen's private room. That imbalance of knowledge gave the evening attention the audience could not yet see. Camilla welcomed the guests with polished remarks about service, stability, and the responsibilities carried by the crown. Her words were appropriate, which sharpened the contradiction. The queen was describing unity, while a concealed struggle over the monarchy's future image remained active behind the screens. Catherine listened without interruption. To those watching, she appeared calm. Yet her stillness had become strategic. She was allowing the program to reach the point at which the alteration could no longer be dismissed as a private misunderstanding. The king's work was honored. Camilla's patronages received warm applause. Images of military service, volunteers, and charities passed across the screens as the orchestra played. Then the final segment began. As planned, Catherine's presence was reduced to a brief sequence. The families from the original film were absent, and the transition toward the next generation had disappeared. Instead, The presentation ended with a formal image of Charles and Camilla beneath the royal standard. The room applauded politely. For several seconds, it appeared that those behind the alteration had succeeded. Camilla turned slightly toward the king, her expression controlled but satisfied. William remained seated while Catherine looked toward the technicians at the rear of the ballroom. What happened next had not been included in the printed program. The screens remained illuminated. A message appeared against a dark background. Original charitable presentation, archived version. A murmur moved through the guests. The first frame showed nurses describing nights spent beside frightened families, military spouses speaking about separation, and educators explaining how stability could change a vulnerable child's life. Catherine appeared only briefly, but the tone was entirely different. She was not positioned above those people. She was listening to them. Then came the line advisors may have considered too sensitive. Duty does not belong to one generation alone. It is carried forward by those prepared to serve next. The sentence was gentle. Inside that ballroom, it carried unmistakable meaning. Camilla's expression changed. An aide moved toward the control desk, but the technician had activated the isolated copy. It could no longer be stopped. The screens divided into two columns. On the left appeared the original film. On the right appeared the altered version. Timestamps, deleted scenes, and the longer running time were displayed beneath them. No accusation had yet been made. None was necessary. The guests could see that the explanation given to the king did not match the evidence before them. Charles leaned forward, no longer watching the images but studying the approval trail now appearing beneath them. The first code led to Camilla's office. The second led to his own central staff. Finally, the hidden message from the private device appeared, with its connection location. The Queen's withdrawing room. The ballroom fell silent. Camilla rose with the controlled authority of someone trying to contain a rapidly changing situation. She stated that production decisions were routinely made by staff, and that technical information could be misunderstood. On its surface, the explanation was reasonable. Then Catherine stood. She did not accuse the Queen of sending the instruction. Instead, she asked for the complete message to be displayed, including the sentence withheld from the king's office when approval was requested. The technician opened the file. The instruction did not merely order Catherine's footage removed. It explained why. The future image of the monarchy, it said, must not be allowed to eclipse the authority of the present queen. Charles read the words in silence. William turned toward his father. Across the ballroom, guests began to understand that they were no longer watching a disagreement about a film. They were witnessing evidence that fear of the future had influenced a decision made in the name of the crown. But even then, the most important question remained unanswered. Had Camilla authorized those words herself, or had someone close to her acted because they believed they already knew exactly what she wanted? The answer did not come from an accusation, but from the reaction of the person standing nearest to the Queen. As the message remained visible across the ballroom screens, one of Camilla's senior private secretaries stepped forward and quietly asked the presentation director to stop the display. The request was framed as an effort to prevent confidential palace material from being shown to guests, yet its urgency immediately drew attention to a detail Catherine had not mentioned publicly. The concealed device was registered to that same advisor. In this dramatized account, the technical record now established a more complete sequence. The instruction had been written on the advisor's device inside the Queen's withdrawing room. It was then forwarded to Camilla's office, passed to the King's scheduling department, and presented there as a necessary adjustment approved by the Queen. The evidence still left one final distinction unresolved. Had the advisor invented Camilla's approval, or had the Queen knowingly allowed her wishes to be expressed through someone else? Camilla answered before Catherine could ask. She stated that she had been concerned about the balance of the gala and had discussed the need to ensure that the serving monarch and consort remained central. She insisted, however, that she had never ordered Catherine's work erased, nor authorized language suggesting that the Princess of Wales represented a threat to her position. It was a carefully constructed response. Camilla acknowledged the concern without accepting responsibility for the method. The advisor, now surrounded by senior palace officials, maintained that every decision had been made in accordance with what the Queen had communicated earlier that day. The ballroom had become the worst possible setting for such ambiguity. If Camilla denied knowing anything, she risked appearing unaware of actions carried out in her name. If she defended the advisor, she would appear to endorse the effort to diminish Catherine. And if she accepted responsibility only for the initial concern, the public meaning of that concern remained damaging enough on its own. Catherine did not press for a confession. Instead, she asked for the charitable film to be considered separately from the internal dispute. Her response shifted the emotional center of the moment away from personal rivalry and back toward the families whose stories had nearly been removed. The original presentation, she said within this fictional scenario, was never intended to announce a transfer of power or diminish the king and queen. It was created to show that service survives because each generation accepts responsibility before it is required to lead. That distinction mattered. Catherine was not claiming the future at the expense of the present. She was arguing that the future had to be prepared openly if the institution expected the public to trust it. The king then faced the decision everyone in the room had been waiting for. Charles could have ended the presentation, removed the technical material from view, and described the incident as an internal misunderstanding. Such a response might have protected the appearance of unity for the remainder of the evening. It would also have left the underlying message untouched, that royal authority could be used to conceal uncomfortable evidence whenever the image of the crown appeared threatened. Instead, the monarch requested that the original film be shown in full. The decision did not publicly condemn his wife. It did something more institutionally significant. It rejected the altered version and restored the message that had been removed. As the film began again, the atmosphere changed. The guests no longer watched Catherine as someone competing for recognition. They saw the nurses, military families, educators, and volunteers whose contributions had been displaced by an argument over royal prominence. When the closing sequence appeared, Catherine's words about responsibility passing between generations no longer sounded like a challenge. They sounded like a reminder of what succession was supposed to achieve. The applause that followed was not explosive or theatrical. It gathered slowly, beginning among the charity representatives before spreading through the ballroom. That restraint made the moment more powerful. The response was not celebrating Camilla's embarrassment. It was acknowledging that something important had been restored. For the queen, however, the consequences were immediate. She remained beside the king, but the confidence that had shaped the beginning of the evening had disappeared. Every guest now understood that members of her household had attempted to remove Catherine's contribution while invoking her authority. Whether Camilla had approved every detail almost became secondary. The plot had been designed to protect her position, and it had instead exposed the insecurity surrounding it. Her humiliation came not through removal from the ballroom, but through the loss of control over the meaning of the event. The gala intended to affirm Camilla's place beside the monarch had become a demonstration of Catherine's restraint, strategic judgment, and growing importance to the future of the British royal family. William, meanwhile, appeared to recognize that the victory carried its own danger. The screens had protected his wife's dignity, but they had also revealed how easily private tension could spread through the machinery of the royal household. The future king was no longer dealing only with a disagreement between two royal women. He was confronting a structure in which advisors could exploit uncertainty between the present reign and the next. That discovery would not disappear when the chandeliers were extinguished. Reports would likely focus on the public embarrassment, the altered film, and the uncomfortable silence between the senior royals. Yet the deeper consequence concerned trust. Could Camilla continue relying on advisors who had acted so aggressively in her name? Could Charles protect his marriage without appearing to ignore what his own household had enabled? And could William and Catherine prepare for their future roles without every sign of readiness being interpreted as impatience? These were not questions one gala could resolve. The monarchy has always depended on the appearance that succession is orderly, natural, and emotionally accepted by those closest to the crown. This episode suggested something more complicated. The constitutional path may be clear, while the human adjustment remains unsettled. Catherine left the ballroom without publicly claiming victory. There was no dramatic confrontation and no demand that Camilla be punished before the guests. Her influence came from allowing the evidence to speak, then directing attention back toward service rather than revenge. That may be the most important meaning of the entire story. Power inside a modern monarchy is not always demonstrated by who commands the room. Sometimes it belongs to the person who understands what the room will remember. And while the screens eventually went dark, the questions they illuminated remained. Was this an isolated attempt by overprotective advisors to manage one royal evening, or evidence that the balance between the present queen and the future queen is becoming increasingly difficult to contain? Because one uncomfortable chapter may have reached its conclusion inside the ballroom, but elsewhere within the House of Windsor, another development was already raising questions about loyalty, succession, and who will shape the monarchy's next public image.